Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here for today's webinar. Our topic today is the coachability factor. That might not be a sort of phrase you've ever heard. Frankly, I just made it up about 3 days ago. And what I will do, though, is unpack it and make it actually make sense to, give you more power to do the work that you do with people. Because if you've never considered it, the coachability of people is incredibly important. It's incredibly relevant to the work that you do. I think all of us as coaches have a sort of intrinsic intuitive notion of what it is to be coachable. Let's sort of break it down and get super specific about what, for the purpose of our conversation, coachability is. And I think it'll be completely consistent with what you think, but perhaps even more so, just kind of, roughen and edge in the corners of it, give it more nuance and dimensionality that you might have ever considered before. So we're going to define coachability as the degree to which one is willing to, 1, accept, 2, take seriously, and 3, do the work to derive benefit from being coached. So that sort of nuanced definition gives us a couple of dimensions of what it is to be coachable. You might be coachable in some ways, but not others. So let's really flesh out what I mean by those different distinct aspects of what it is to be coachable, each of which is largely independent, but somehow kind of strung together and sort of interrelated. And we'll see how that unpacks. So the 3 dimensions of coachability are 1, openness. Like, are you open to it? To being coached at all? If someone were to say, hey, I'd like to give you some coaching. No, I'm not really into coaching. Or, hey, that sounds cool. Let's do this. That's what I call openness. That's the first thing, and certainly it is the prerequisite to anything else of terms of coachability mattering. Once you've got that openness, you've got one that's slightly different, but similarly, but enough to sort of tease out as a separate thing. Trust. Well, I'm open to being coached, but do I trust the coaching as is being laid down? Do I trust you to be an authority to weigh in on? Do I trust you to have my best interests at heart in order to take that coach? Yeah, coaching, that sounds cool, but is what you're saying right? That's the second dimension, trust to truly take the coaching. And the third, ability, the ability to execute on the coaching. You can have openness to coaching and you can trust that it's the right thing to do. Do you have what I'll call sort of the soft skills of actually taking that inspiration, that clarity, that game plan out of that session and map it onto your life? Make space to actually do the work, to have the coaching make a difference beyond what happened during that session. So to sort of get into more of where these dimensions and how they sort of interplay, I'd like to introduce another completely made up concept that I call the coachability spectrum, where we'll kind of look at basically how humanity as a general kind of falls onto a spectrum of, well, are they coachable? Again, I said that these 3 dimensions of coachability are kind of independent things, but they all kind of coalesce into a nice sort of spectrum that we're going to see as we unpack this. So our coachability spectrum, we have basically a spectrum, and there's not much to it. There's one side and another, and I'm going to say that going towards the right is towards the direction of rising coachability. And let's give it a little nuance. Let's color code it. I'm going to tip my hat of being pro-coaching and pro-coachable to say that, red is like uncoachable, and in the green, that's where we're getting coachable. There's a certain value judgment onto coachability that I think we'd all agree upon. Now, it's easy to distinguish the poles of this spectrum, the endpoints. In the red zone, the uncoachable, you've got sort of the uncoachable know-it-all. I think we all kind of know people in our lives who more or less sort of describe this, the sort of like, you can't contribute to me. I'm sure I know best than anyone. Okay, cool. That's a certain point of the spectrum that is, by mere declaration, uncoachable. And on the other side of the spectrum, we've got what I would call the A students of coaching. These are people who are, have the humility to take coaching, have the sort of trust that, yes, someone has things to contribute to me that's going to allow me to be better, and has the soft skills to sort of put these things in action to actually make the coaching in the session actually make a difference in their lives through practice, habit building, execution, and whatever else that is called for in the work of coaching itself. I think it's fun and interesting also to, not only distinguish these points, but there's also a couple of, these end points, but there's also sort of bands and sections along there that we could kind of point to. along here you might have what we'll call the skeptics. Maybe they're not know-it-alls, but they're skeptical of the whole coaching thing. It may, I don't know if that's really a thing or really a thing for me. That might be great for other people, but I don't see the value. Moving a little further up the coachability spectrum, you could have what I call the coaching curious. Well, maybe that would work. I don't know though. I don't want to be a sucker or taken for a ride. I don't want to do something and invest energy, time, and money into something that isn't going to work. I'm curious, but I'm not sure. Other bands of the coaching, as we get beyond that mere curiosity into more commitment, we have rising trust. As you move towards more coachable, that's where trust is more and more present. As you're early, here on the spectrum, like, I'm not sure that person's got my right interest in heart or has the expertise that's going to apply to my situation. But you can become more coachable as that trust rises. And as trust enters the picture, then becomes the importance of responsibility. Rising responsibility is moving even further towards that total coachability on that spectrum. And by responsibility, I mean, well, on the lower end, you could have a mindset that's like, okay, coach, I'm in. That sounds great. Do me. Let me know when I'm fixed and complete and got that raise or whatever else. There's a certain sense of, we'll do it to me. And I'm like, yeah, let's rock. Zero responsibility. But as responsibility rises, there becomes that sort of sense of taking ownership of co-creating the process, co-participating in the process, and recognizing and knowing that they need to do the work in order to have the coaching make a difference. And at the greatest peaks of responsibility, it's not only knowing and taking that ownership, it's the raw ability. To, again, have those soft skills of making space in your calendar. And this band here of rising responsibility is quite near and dear to my heart. It's what I call the motivated mere mortals. They're down with what you're saying. They're interested. They believe that this is a path that's going to work for them. And they know they have to show up. But they might lack, as I certainly did, because I'm a motivated mere mortal, actually, it turns out this is what the roots of CoachAccountable. The soft skills to have mastery with your calendar. The analogy I like to do, or sort of the broad character stroke, broad brush strokes of the character that I'm talking about here is, well, people who take on coaching are usually up to stuff. They've got big lives. They've got busy things to do. And coaching fundamentally is the act of taking on more, growing beyond the comfortable din of whatever you're responsible for to be more and grow more into that. So making space for what is intrinsically stretching above and beyond is a soft skill that not all of us have. I totally didn't have it. Mastery with your calendar, the ability to make space, the ability to keep sort of plans and promises in existence so that you can take them out of the coaching session where you're inspired and super convinced that it's a good idea, and actually wedge it into your busy life and do the work. Motivated mere mortals. CoachAccountable has the roots in sort of structures to help motivated mortals become more like those A students of coaching. So these are the broad sort of regions of the spectrum that I would point to. Perhaps we could do more storytelling and sort of pick some more character archetypes of where they fit on in terms of their coachability. But that gives you enough of the lay of the land for us to have a conversation about how and why this coachability matters to your ability as a coach to be effective with anyone, or which people you could be effective with. So to measure that, let's throw on a little y-axis here, which, for lack of a better word, I'm going to call workability. And that's basically a sort of crude, hand-wavy, but sufficient to illustrate the point and give the nuance and insight, a measure of how's it going to go. And this workability is truly a force multiplier. It is the coachability factor. If workability is high, any work that you put in is going to be it's going to work out okay. In fact, at the bottom of this scale, workability, it's not going to work. There's no workability, and this coaching is either not going to happen, or if it happens, it's going to be under duress or under circumstances where it's just not going to take. It's not going to work. And at the top of the spectrum, it's going to be great, almost predictably. And so I would assert that, again, without any science whatsoever, the National Institute for Science and Technology rejected my proposal for workability units as a sort of standard measure because they said it's not measurable, and they're right. You've got a curve that basically looks like this, where the A students of coaching, this factor of it's going to be great is pretty much can be taken for granted because it's it's a little, circular reasoning, but trusting the process, being interested, being clear the work is worth doing, and having the wherewithal and ability to and space in their life to do it means it's going to be good, right? And as you go down this curve, into the realm of motivated mere mortals, where responsibility starts to teeter off, that effectiveness kind of tapers off with it. For me, it was always the experience of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Great coaching sessions. I'm clear-headed and inspired. Let's do this. And then I only executed on half of the plan at best. Okay, well, there is to regroup, recreate, and represence, and again, make space and try again next week, and hopefully hope it works out. And as you go down further, as trust falls out, you have less of that sort of like, yeah, I'm really going to do it, versus like, maybe, I'm not sure. And as we all know, when the coaching isn't trusted, when it's not worked on, it can't make a difference. So workability attendantly goes down. Now, this measure, of course, is not an absolute. Again, it's not a real unit, but it gives a sense. But more to the point, it's a force multiplier. A truly exceptional coach can probably work with someone in this region and still get pretty decent results. Likewise, a very weak coach who's just kind of phoning it in and not really caring, or not having really good, genuine expertise, might be able to work with an A student and still get good results. The point is that all things otherwise being equal, this curve is fairly accurate, at least conceptually, as a force multiplier that determines and dictates how well you're going to be able to influence and work with a given individual who sits somewhere on this spectrum. Now, this kind of looks bleak, because we'll notice that there's a lot of the spectrum where there's just no workability at all. And even here, even with motivated mere mortals whose intentions are great, but stuff's going to fall out, that effectiveness, again, is going to be hamstrung by 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and just going slow because the soft skills or the trust to execute aren't quite there. But that's okay, because everyone here watching this webinar has the advantage of using CoachAccountable, and I'm here to sort of give good news, not just to say that CoachAccountable is great, but to really train you guys and attune you to what you can do thanks to using CoachAccountable to influence this. I assert, and because I've seen plenty, that you can do a little bit better beyond this baseline effectiveness when you add in CoachAccountable to support people. The motivated mere mortals can become and act more as the A students of coaching, with those structures that are going to help them bring it to their lives. As we covered in the session cycle webinar, there's only so much you can do during the session itself, that 1 precious hour or half hour that happens once a week or once a month or whatever. But there's an awful lot of time between that session, time where things can either fall out or action can be happened that really forwards the momentum of getting the work done, putting into their lives, and then having this sort of virtuous upward spiraling cycle of accomplishments begets satisfaction, begets more accomplishments and execution, and so on. So having CoachAccountable there to support, being that presence for you between those sessions, giving those nudges, those hot triggers we'll talk about, allows that greater follow through, which means that more people on the spectrum can benefit more thoroughly. You can also do it just a little bit better for what CoachAccountable has to offer you as a coach, which is when you have CoachAccountable to showcase your coaching. You've got the coaching curious if they're not working with you yet because they're not sure what they're getting into, if it's going to be right for them, if it's going to give the details, if it's going to deliver on the promises. I've often said, and I'll reiterate again, I find that one of coaching's biggest problems is how opaque it is as a process. It's, to the outside, uninitiated, it just looks like a bunch of conversations, maybe some notes flying back and forth. It's hard to appreciate what it is if you've never experienced it. For those of who experienced it, we of course know it's the real deal. It's extremely powerful. It's why I've dedicated the last decade of my life professionally to elevating this industry. It's so good. But there's a whole bunch of humanity that gets down with coaching only to the extent of like, yeah, for sports ball, right? That's cool. Sports. This whole realm of it being lost on people as a thing that could actually impact their lives as a non-professional sport is this major opportunity for us as an industry and a consortium of professionals to serve a much broader band of humanity. And that gets me excited. So being able to sort of pull back the curtain on your coaching process and show some of how it works allows you to sort of let the coaching curious see what they're getting into, have confidence that this deal is right for them, and take the step to go from merely coaching curious to actively engaged and therefore doing the work and getting what there is to get. And as I sort of, again, draw here, like you might even convince some of the skeptics, perhaps not all, but by, again, making coaching a more tangibly results-based process, you can have more people understand it and therefore make that leap into like, you know what, coaching actually might be a legit endeavor and it might even be right for me. Let's now look at what is very sort of useful to you. I mean, that's a nice survey of what it is to be coachable and sort of some of the distinctions and nuances along that spectrum. But what can you guys do with that? Well, let's look into what it is to influence those three dimensions of coachability, either to morph the curve itself to be able to more effectively have workability for more people, or nudge specific people further up the spectrum to being more coachable. So let's first look at influencing openness, that third dimension, that openness to being coached at all. I have a phrase that I used to use a lot more in CoachAccountable sort of outward-facing marketing copy. It's kind of a gross one, but it still has merit. A more tangible, results-based process. Again, what I alluded to earlier, if coaching just looks like a phone call and a notebook, it just looks like the memories of some good conversations and hopefully something comes out of it, that's a lot harder to appreciate, especially if you're bringing a skeptical eye, which many people should do, and it's a very valid thing to do. Like, okay, well, show me. When you transform that sort of understanding of what coaching is and any flowering language that tries to describe it, which is very hard, and instead replace it with or augment it with a more tangible, like able to be seen, to be understood, to be perceived. Oh, that's what it looks like. That's how it goes. And then results-based, able to show off like, well, here's what working with a client typically looks like. We start here and we end up here. Here's the chart, or here's the sort of things that get done. Here are the sort of goals and milestones that we tackle and accomplish, and in what times. These showing off these things and making coaching look more results-based and more tangible. Hopefully that phrase doesn't seem as gross anymore and actually matters as a real opportunity for you to make what you do more compelling. That is influencing the openness to being coached. Along the way, if you do that, if you make it more tangible and results-based, you have some power to be able to convince the skeptics, and that again is by showing the work. Well, here's the work, here's what it looks like. And that gives them sort of new eyes for that, again, very healthy skepticism to reevaluate with more information and less just trust the process. You might even make it safe for the curious. And by making it safe, what I mean is, making the deal clear. Well, here's what you get. Here's how it works. Here are some results that are typical. Here's the structure. That curiosity can then peek into like, okay, I could see this being a good value because again, I can better appreciate it. Again, when coaching is ephemeral, I'm not sure when someone says, just schedule a call with me and we'll see if it's a better fit, and hard sell might be coming at the end, but whether it is or not, you're probably concerned that that is coming. Bring it to the surface, those details, and let the curious actually take that action to say like, okay, this looks right for me. I wouldn't feel like I was running the risk that I'm taking advantage of or might feel like a sucker. You make it safe for them by bringing it to the surface, what they're getting. And this is this last bullet point is of the longer standing arc, but it's near and dear to my heart. And no one person on this call can actually influence this, but all jointly together, anything that we do that makes coaching seem more approachable and understandable and relatable and just well understood is like, wow, yeah, it's a good thing. Elevate the cultural standing of coaching. We're to a point where having a therapist is almost in vogue right now. It doesn't have sort of the stigma that it used to, like, oh, you must be something wrong with you. You have a therapist. It's really quite like, yeah, I talked about that with my therapist, and it's a nonchalant thing, and that's a great thing. I think there's a wonderful opportunity for, and a very healthy sort of litmus test. If people are just as open, like, yeah, I have a coach. Of course I have a coach. Michael Jordan had a coach. Everyone has a coach. Duh. Why wouldn't you to be the best that you could be in this world? Elevating the cultural standing of coaching is one of the sort of like the end all be all influence of the general openness of the population to being coached itself. And every one of us that when we do the work that we do with coaching, when we deliver on what we promise and show that like this is a real legit process that works, that has its own little way of pulling in that direction of the broader understanding of like, yeah, coaching's a thing. It's great. Let's talk now about influencing trust, and that is trust to truly take the coaching. Cultivating trust and eliciting responsibility. because it's kind of a two-way street, like trusting that you're right for this thing. Cultivating trust, of course, the first one is demonstrating credibility, your bona fides and the sort of work that you do, and expressing that clearly on your website is something you can do. Coach Accountable, again, can give you a leg up on that. And for tips on how to use that leg up, the What's Missing from Your Website webinar from a couple of months ago gives lots of ideas. Again, it's about surfacing through the details. Here's the process. Here's how it works. Here are the sort of results that you do. And again, that record keeping, that visible charting of what a coaching relationship looks like gives you that way to demonstrate that credibility in a way that not quite as forward demonstrations and showing and sharing of how you work allow. Build rapport. That one's truly one that I can't do much about that, but of course it should be on your radar of an important thing to have. And then explore for a suitable fit. Part of that trusting thing is knowing that for a would-be client, knowing that you don't just work with anyone, it's got to be a good fit. We got an email in response to this that goes as follows. I just had to turn down a prospective client for two main reasons. One, he was being sponsored by his company for coaching, and in our complimentary discovery session, he indicated that he is seriously considering quitting the company and going elsewhere. And two, I was unconvinced that he had a real motivation to change and get results. Now he has gone with another coach who I can only presume has no integrity about taking money from the company, but is also one of those feel-good, zero results, fluffy life coach types. For me, everyone may be coachable, but your coaching approach, values, style, etc., might not be the best match. Let's talk a little bit about that other facet of building trust, and again, that two-way street, eliciting responsibility. Others, we got an email, not sure I can attend, but I've literally just been thinking it would be great to have some kind of assessment to evaluate these nuances and make a good determination as to how or if the coach or mentor someone in addiction recovery. So eliciting responsibility, you have to, as part of that whole eliciting responsibility, that's what this writer is asking about. I say there is to explicitly create their participation, which is kind of, again, word salad. But to break it down, I would say that's one, there is to convey the deal clearly and unapologetically. This is what I was saying about the podcast that I was listening to. Penn Jillette worked with a fellow named Ray Cronus, who's a former NASA scientist. And Ray kind of was his coach, was his guide to Penn losing 105 pounds in 86 days. So during the interview, Penn describes what it was like in terms of what Ray said to him at the onset of this example. He said, now, Penn, we both know that cults are bad, and but they are very good at eliciting, a sort of sense of adherence that is necessary. So we're gonna pretend, just because it's fun, that you're gonna choose to join my cult for a specific period of time, and we're gonna basically have it so that everything I say you have to do, and you will unquestionably, without question, give me the assumption of absolute power over you. And we're going to do this. And the things that we do together, half of them are probably going to be BS, but we don't know which half. So we're just going to go with this flow, and that's the deal. And you need to agree to that, okay? And Penn's like, okay. Penn, of course, tells the story better than I do, but that was basically the created agreement that Penn made with Ray. And it was highly workable because he demanded full adherence, complete and utter adherence to what he was saying, and he was able to make, I guess, medical miracles happen, right? Now, your rules that you create with people don't probably have to be that extreme. They certainly don't have to. They probably shouldn't be that extreme, because that's an awful lot of purchase to assume with someone. But you can create some rules, like Penn did with Ray, that sort of similarly call for a participation, a responsibility on the part of your client in order for this to work. This is something that you can definitely should have in a conversation, and you might then codify in an agreement. A Coach Accountable agreement can allow you to sort of put these things in words and then capture their signature, and it becomes a touch point of what you agreed to. And this is important because when the going gets rough, it becomes a sort of place to reference back to. Like, okay, let's revisit the rules of our engagement to sort of keep in integrity are working together. Now, there's some fun rules that you can kind of create with your clients. Again, they don't have to be as extreme of like join my cult for the next duration of this program, But they can be things like, what Coach Accountable allows you to do. So, something like all actions set up in Coach Accountable are worth doing. You might create a rule that works like gravity. If we set up an action item in your battle plan, you need to either do it on time, or you need to repromise by rescheduling, or you need to cancel it. That's not okay to let it slide. That could be a rule. You sort of create the importance and significance that gives them, that elicits their responsibility, right? More of that, more things like, you must comment on why when falling short on metrics. Maybe you have a habit metric that's binary, and you might set a rule like, on day 3, if you're not having done it, you need to get into communication. Either post a comment of why and what's going on, or maybe you tell them you need to write up a journal entry that sort of unpacks what's going on so that we can intervene. But there's no letting it slide without, oh, it just happened, talk to you next session. Things like that are, again, you create that context of eliciting responsibility. Another example one, like, you must do your pre-session check-in. The system will send you that worksheet where you can say how it's going, what's working, what's not, what you're excited to talk about. And if you don't do it, we will not have a session. Elicit their responsibility. And another one, when assignments are late, our interactions are on pause. If you've got an overdue worksheet in Coach Accountable, we all know it. You got an alert, like, hey, this is late. I got an alert, this is now late. That means we'll talk once you mark it complete. None of these are necessary. Any one of these may or may not be your style, but I want to sort of give you sort of ideas of building blocks of the kind of rules that you can create with your clients up front to, again, establish that trust of, this is a good fit and you're sufficiently motivated. And if you keep up with these rules in integrity, we will continue working. And if you don't, we need to address that in order to continue working. It puts the onus on them in a very healthy way and lets them know that you mean business, and you're being very clear that they need to generate their participation. All of these things are a wonderful boon to trust. Again, in my original thought for this webinar, I wasn't going to handle the second dimension of trust, but it turns out there's some things that Coach Accountable can help you do this, and in the context of coachability at large, this is a worthy inclusion as well. So my thanks to the person who emailed about that. The next part of eliciting responsibility, that I talked just about the deal, but also let them generate their own declaration. There's a worksheet template that came out in another one of the worksheets, which we call Creating That It Matters. And now it's a standard, as of Monday, it's a standard issue 1. So if you sign up since Monday, this is also preloaded in your account. And if you want this, we'll have this in the show notes to install it. This is, again, a sort of idea of what you can do as coach to assign them like a little thoughtful exercise and do the work to create that whatever we establish in our coaching relationship is worth doing. It matters. Doing it in integrity and on time matters. And again, just like the other agreement that you can put on file, when the going gets rough, you can have someone turn back to what they said about where you're likely to get caught up. What will you do if you're not feeling it, if you're not trusting the process, get in communication, all these sorts of things, you can let them sort of self-declare and put on record forever, for as long as you're working together, of course. And that becomes that touch point. Again, I hope that now, by now, to loop back, I've unpacked that sort of gnarly phrase of eliciting their participation, creating their agreement to participate and the responsibility to do so. Which takes us now to the third dimension, influencing ability, i.e. the ability to execute on coaching. Like I said, influencing this ability was truly the main and original impetus behind the design of Coach Accountable. What this basically means is that we want to make people better at being coached, because being coached can be hard. Like I said earlier, it is fundamentally an exercise in stretching beyond what you're used to doing so you can grow. So if you don't have those skills, we can influence someone's ability to bring those skills in order to, do the work and have the coaching matter. Well, some of the ways that we can influence the ability is to have a clear-cut game. Again, having an action plan, that's clear, where we take forgetting off the table and instead make a clear sense of like, well, this is what I co-created with my coach. This is what there is to do. That allows people to, again, not forget and actually see what there is to do and therefore focus. Hot triggers to take action. This is taken from B.J. Fogg's work in behavioral psychology. He defines behavior is equal to the sort of intersection of motivation. Hey, this is worth doing. The ability, well, I actually could do this. And trigger. a reminder to, at a point when you actually could do it, do the work. So B equals MAT. CoachAccountable is rife with hot triggers where you basically have those timely reminders that, fire off to someone to say, hey, don't forget this is due now or in 2 days or 50 minutes from now, don't forget to do it. And it allows them to easily do it. Speaking of that, we also want to minimize friction to participation. If participating with you is involving a lot of sort of extra administrative work and sloggy kind of little tasks that are not convenient, participation will accordingly go down. Conversely, you make it as easy as possible, give it to them on a silver platter, so all they have to do is that hard work of actually doing the work without worrying about logistics and all that. That's friction. We minimize it, and that gives them space and energy and just cognitive load freed up so they can show up for it. That's why when you send someone a reminder to do something, they can just hit reply. It says like, yep, I've done this. Or when it says, hey, what's your number for today? When recording a metric, they can just reply to the text or email, it's this, and they can send a comment and hit send. We're not going to make them log in. We're not going to make them do funny things where they have to worry about like, I forgot my password. I don't know, coach, I'm not feeling it. Minimize the friction. And then finally, shared access, when both parties can, again, at all times go to see the scoreboard, what is there to do. It's that clarity, it's that focus, and both parties can sort of chime in and quickly talk to each other. Coach, you as coach can do what I referenced in the webinar as benevolent stalker time. Just kind of give them a little check-in, see if some things are going wrong, and give them that sort of loving nudge and encouragement. Like, hey, I noticed that the deadline for this slipped. Do you need any support? Remember, the subtext of this all being, remember, a real human being is caring that you do this and is aware when you're not doing it. All those sorts of things of transparency, awareness, and focus, that's shared access. And all these things together influence someone's ability, makes them move on up more towards an A student of coaching in order to really make space and remember, quite frankly, to execute on the coaching. So in summary, the coachability of your clients and your would-be clients, so not just the people who work with, but influencing the ones who are curious, maybe skeptical, but happen to see your work. All of that is a force multiplier on your ability to deliver good coaching and have it make a difference with people. There are 3 dimensions that you can influence, and each of the 3 have a sort of different set of nuances of how to go about that. You can influence their ability to execute, to make space in their life, and if you do that, they are able to actually follow through, and for it, they get better results. You can influence their trust to take the coaching. And when they trust you to take the coaching more, they actually will show up to do the work. And incidentally, they get better results. And you can influence their openness to being coached. And if they're more open to it, if they go from not open to open, that means they actually work with you in the first place and get better results. There you have it. That's the whole deal of the coachability factor. Thanks for watching.